There were 5 or 6 credit cards that he had taken out that were all maxed out. I really thought he was a father and a husband and a provider and a good person, but I could not believe that he could be so irresponsible. We had 2 young children. I think they were 5 and 9 at the time. I think the credit cards added up to about £65,000. He was charged during that 6 months apart with harassment because I made it very clear to the police and to the domestic violence organisation that he had a gambling addiction. And he admitted it in my face, admitted it. Literally that close with a, what are you going to do about it? He used to take his laptop to the toilet. He couldn't even stop. Found out about the debts in my name. Got some threatening letters from people he'd borrowed money from. In his very last show of defiance, I suppose, he chose to take his own life in front of myself and my son. I see that night now ridiculously like a Die Hard movie. So many people came out and from everywhere. I just sat there and felt like the world had ended. There were often times that I just wanted to go to sleep and not wake up. But I wouldn't, because I had 2 kids that depended on me. And I loved them, and I wouldn't have done to them what he did to us.
This episode is supported by Gamban, helping you break the cycle before it even starts. Imagine finding out your partner has secretly lost hundreds of thousands of pounds, but in your name. Today, I'm speaking to a woman whose husband's gambling addiction didn't just destroy finances, it sadly ended in tragedy. This is the side of gambling addiction nobody talks about. The partners, the kids, and the aftermath. He wasn't just gambling, he was living a double life, and she had no idea until it was too late. This is Julie's story. Julie, welcome to the Addicted Recovery Show.
Lovely to be here, Dan.
Thanks, Julie. I've been looking forward to sitting down with you, and we've just had a brief little conversation before we started recording, and we've got an amazing connection going already. I can't wait to sit down and chat with you for the next hour and a half and make that connection even stronger. The first question I like to ask, if I ask you to think of your most powerful gambling memory, what comes to mind when I ask that?
I think it has to be the disclosure moment when I knew something was wrong. For a few weeks, maybe even months, I felt a difference in our life. I noticed things about our finances, and it sort of accumulated into asking small questions over a couple of weeks and not getting any specific answers. But then one day, due to some unpaid bills that I couldn't understand because we were both working at that time, it led to an argument. And that argument meant that he then had to disclose to me that he had been gambling. He didn't say for how long, he didn't say how much, but it turned out there were 5 or 6 credit cards that he had taken out that were all maxed out. And he was obviously panicking and having trouble dealing with those debts and those cards and keeping them hidden from me. I just remember the really sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. And I genuinely couldn't believe I was looking at a man I'd already been with probably 10 years, and I didn't recognise him. I didn't know who he was. I really thought he was, a father and a husband and a provider and a good person. I still thought he was a good person, but I could not believe at the time that he could be so irresponsible and financially, irresponsible with the family's money, with the money that provides for his children. There was just total confusion. I just didn't know what to say and didn't know what to do. It will be a moment that stays with me for the rest of my life, because I know from that point that he disclosed this to me, my life, my family's life, my children's life was never going to be the same again.
In that moment, is there any kind of, I wouldn't say relief, but like you said, that was the disclosure moment. So obviously you've had suspicions building up to that, and I'm guessing he's denied them as you've been going along. Is there any sort of like, "Ah, I knew it"?
Do you know what? I actually accused him initially of having an affair, because I believed that he'd removed himself from the family, like from the family home a bit more. He did work nights, but he was so distracted and he was on his phone all the time. And if he wasn't on his phone, he was on his laptop. But I didn't have any upbringing that I was familiar with gambling. My gambling knowledge at that point was my mum and dad doing the pools on a Saturday and having the old fella knock at the door, you know, and the pool slip and paying the £1.86 or whatever it was back then. Shows how old I am. And maybe doing the Grand National sweep for 50p each. Me and my sister, my mum and my dad, the day of the Grand National, we all put 50p in. That was my knowledge of gambling. So I had absolutely no idea that his distraction, his change of mood, our lack of finances were to do with that. And I think, if I'm honest, I would rather it had been an affair, because I feel that would have been so much easier to deal with than then. At that moment, I felt for him, although his attitude at that point was, look, this is my money, my problem, my issue, I'll deal with it. It wasn't his problem, because then it moved over onto my shoulders and it became my problem. So there was no sense of relief for me at all. Maybe for him, because he wasn't having to hide everything, but in his disclosure, his attitude then became more coercive and more controlling, because it was, you can't say anything about this. You can't stop me doing it. You don't have a say. You have to live with it and help me deal with it now. And that was such a mix of emotions for me. As I said, I just remember that sick feeling in my stomach. You know, we were mortgaged. We had 2 young children. I think they were 5 and 9 at the time. And I just didn't know how we were going to cope. And I mean, at that point, I think the credit cards added up to about £65,000. But it didn't matter. It's not about the money. It's not about the amount of money. I mean, obviously, the bigger the amount of money, the harder it is. It was more about I could not believe he'd done that to us at that point. And I had no understanding of how deep it was. I had no understanding of addiction. And I just felt so alone and really, really scared.
It's like the betrayal of it, but
Yeah.
also combined with the shock. It's like you said, you've
Yeah.
been with him for 10
Yeah.
years, and the pools, you speak of the pools, Julie, your hair looks fantastic. Your outfit looks amazing. No one's going to believe you. No one's going to believe us that you're old enough when the pools are around. So don't worry. Right. Let's rewind back a few years then before we get to that moment, because I'm guessing you've had suspicions before that. So when did you first realize something wasn't right, and how did you approach it?
I met Bill when in my early 20s, and we worked together. We started going out. I thought his generosity with money was just being quite naive then. I thought it was just him trying to show me, you know, what a great fella he was, the fact he could buy me things and do stuff. I didn't realise at the time, and hindsight is such a great thing, that it was all part and parcel of his actual coercive controlling behaviour that I didn't know was there. He bought me my very, very first mobile phone. I'd never had one before. And I thought at the time, wow, you know, this is amazing. But he bought me that mobile phone so that he knew or could contact me at any point to see where I was and what I was doing. And maybe had I realised there were periods of time even then that he used to disappear for like 2 or 3 hours. Now, back then, there was no online gambling. And I didn't, as I said, I had no real history of a gambler in my life. So I didn't know where he was or what he was doing. And I suppose in a way, as the years went on, that was why I came to the conclusion that he might be having an affair or seeing other women, because I didn't know where he was. And it was like radio silence for 3-4 hours at a time. Later on, I found out that's when he was in casinos. He always worked of an evening. He worked really hard, but I just presumed it was part of his work. Or, you know, I didn't want to think that anything bad was going on. You know, I went out with him for 3 years. We got engaged. We got married. We were both working. We took out a mortgage. We bought a home. And a few years later, you know, we had our first daughter and things were going okay. It was only really a period of time, maybe just before we had our son, which was about 4.5 years later, that I began to worry about our finances and realised that things weren't adding up because we'd both worked. It should have been better. And the argument at that disclosure moment was due to the fact that I'd checked our savings and they were gone. There was nothing there. And I couldn't then stop myself from trying to find out what had happened. And the shock that it had all been gambled away was unbelievable, because I couldn't go to my parents or I couldn't go to friends and say, you know, that person that is that generous, kind, whoever to the outside world has now taken everything from me, taken everything from his children. I wasn't earning enough money to cover everything. You know, I was worked in a school for 10 years. So I was on a basic wage. He was the earner and we relied on him, and he'd let us down so badly that I was just petrified. I was so upset. But as angry and petrified as I was, I didn't want anyone else feeling that way about him. I might have had my thoughts and feelings, but I didn't want to express that to anybody and have them feel the same way, because at that point, and as we talk through the rest of my lived experience, I thought it was something we could deal with then and there in the moment. Yeah, all right, I'll work harder. We can pay off these debts. We can get back to normal. We can do this, we can do that. I can do this, I can do that, with no idea what little control I had on the situation and how much worse it was going to get as time rolled on.
The way you're sort of defending him from outside criticism and outside judgment shows you had the full intention of working through this together. We're going to come out together, the other side.
He was my husband. He was the man I fell in love with and married and looked to be my partner for the rest of my life. You know, I wouldn't have married him and bought a house with him and had 2 children with him had I have ever thought that he would do anything like this, or at that point felt he had let us down so badly. And as bad as I felt, that sick feeling, that scared feeling, that frustrated feeling, even the angry feeling, I still loved him and I wanted us to be okay. I wanted it to be all right. And it just didn't happen that way. And that's what's so difficult to work through, you know, in any form of gambling related harm. Any person that you genuinely care about, whether it's a brother, a sister, a husband, a wife, a son or a daughter, you want to help them. All you want to do is help them and help the family go back to some form of normality. But that normality never happens. And that's why that disclosure moment is so massive to me. Because like I said, our lives at that point, when the kids were like 5 and 9, were never ever the same again.
How many years are we talking from when you first suspected something, when you first had suspicions, up until that disclosure moment?
I would say I'd say it was a good 2 years of actual real concern. But that was obviously after we'd got married and got a mortgage and bought the house and I'd had the kids. And I think it was more being a mum as well as just a partner or just a wife. Had we not had the children, things could have been very different. But as I said, I met and married him because I loved him. I had kids with him because I loved him. And I wanted the family scenario. I was never the kind of woman who, I was happy going to Primark or Tesco's and buying a handbag or some clothes. I never asked for anything bigger, anything more. All I wanted us to do was have a home, enjoy our life together and have the odd holiday if we could, be around our families if we could. So I couldn't understand where his need for more and more money came from, because it wasn't a demand that I'd ever put on him. And there was never a point that there were any expectations to do so. So I think that made it even more of a shock at the time.
Talk me through like the emotions that you must have been feeling for those 2 years where I'm guessing you're doubting him, then you're doubting yourself. There must have been like so much confusion.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think people don't realise how much you begin to doubt yourself, because then I started to feel when I probably wasn't asking the right questions. Maybe I was too scared to ask those questions. Maybe I didn't actually really want to know and hoped that things were going to just get back to normal. And then I kept thinking, well, maybe it's just you and you're being a little bit too overthinking things. Maybe it's having the kids and the pressure of, working, having the kids, financially, what that brings, birthday parties, presents, Christmas. And I just thought that the more I hung in there and the more time went on, it would get better. But all I saw it over that period of years was it getting worse. And that wasn't just financially, that was his personality. As I said, he was always quite a controlling figure. But again, I saw that as caring at the time. But I genuinely didn't think that he had any issues or problems that would lead to something as massive as our life for the following 15 years and even up to now has caused, the chaos and the upset and the grief and the mental health problems for all of us that we've had over the following 15, 20 years.
Gamban blocks thousands of gambling websites and betting apps on your devices. Once it's installed, these sites simply don't open. The worst part about my gambling addiction wasn't losing the money, it was waking up the next day and pretending like nothing had happened. That voice that tells you just one more and then I'll stop, or I'll stop. But tomorrow comes and that cycle starts again. Another bet, another loss, and another promise to quit. That's the trap of gambling, when it's always right there on your phone. One of the biggest things that helped me early in my recovery was realizing something so simple. Willpower alone isn't enough when gambling is always one click away. And that's why tools like Gamban can be so powerful. And when gambling isn't constantly in front of you, something changes. Your brain finally gets space to reset, space to think and space to recover. So if you're serious about taking back control, install Gamban today. The link's below. Put a little bit of friction between you and that first bet.
So after that, like that, on that night, that day of the disclosure moment, what is, like you're saying, you want to work through it together. Has he agreed that he's going to stop gambling there and then sort of talk me through what's happened next?
There was no real talk, I think. There was no real talk of his gambling. I do remember him saying, it's my money and I will do what I want with it. And I do remember just before that moment, maybe a few weeks beforehand, although he was working nights and we weren't earning or the money wasn't coming in like it should, that he did some work for my dad during the day. My dad was a builder. He had his own business at the time. And he started to do some work for him, like labouring work and stuff. And I kind of found that weird, but I thought, well, fair play to him. Money isn't great in the minute. He's working extra hours to put more money in. As it turns out, he was working extra hours to use that money to gamble with. And that put an even higher sense of anger probably in me, that my dad had been good enough to give him the work and he didn't bring that money into the home. It was extra money. He was working even harder, going without sleep, but then using that money to continue to gamble, because in his own mind, he could beat the system. He was going to beat the system. He was just going to get that one big win and everything would be sorted out. And I know in a really weird way, he was actually doing it for us at the time. He didn't want us working until we were 70. He wanted to give the kids everything, but it was the way he was doing it. I'd have been happy, just working harder, for us to work harder, save harder. But he wasn't. He wanted more than that. And over the few years came on after that disclosure moment, I then started to do a bit of research to see if I could find help for someone who gambled. And back then, so we're talking a good 15, 20 years ago now, all there was GamCare. And I can remember at the time contacting GamCare and them sending me out leaflets. I contacted perhaps the Samaritans or somewhere else. They sent me out leaflets just on advice. GamCare obviously sent the gambling ones, mental health advice, just stuff that I was finding it harder and harder to have conversations with him, because his temper and his whole, I'm not talking about this because this is not my problem. I haven't got a problem. I couldn't have those conversations. So the best way I could deal with it was to try and find him the help. And I used to leave the leaflets out for him when he come home at night so that he could hopefully have a read and that light bulb moment would go on or whatever. And I always used to find them just ripped up into pieces in a pile where I'd left them. And it kind of just showed that he didn't want any help and he wasn't prepared to find or have that help. He still thought everything was under his control and he could move forward with this. And he really couldn't, because I believe my daughter, over the next couple of years, this spiral just continued. He continued to gamble. These credit cards we were paying, I was trying to swap them. The pressure I was under, back then you could get the 0% credit cards. And so we were just barely paying the minimums on each of these cards. And then I had to keep mapping out the dates that the 0% were going to run out so that I could try and move them to another 0% card and another 0% card. And the stress that brought me was absolutely immense, because they weren't going away. The gambling was still happening. I mean, over this whole period of time, which was probably another 2 or 3 years, the debts were getting bigger. He actually remortgaged the house without me knowing. And again, not a penny of that went on to paying anything off. And his moods and his anger and his whole being just changed to a person that I didn't recognize at all. And it was so hard, because although they were young, kids are really good at picking up on atmospheres, and as much as you try not to argue in front of them, they saw me cry quite a lot. They heard him quite a lot. They even picked up on his change of personality. My son was a lot younger, so I think he was protected a little bit more from that. But my daughter, being that 4.5 years older, and absolutely, she was the apple of her dad's eye when she was born. She held him up on a pedestal. He was her hero. And it was so hard to see her so confused, you know, at the ages of 9, 10, 11, when so much was going on in her own little mind and her own body. It was such a massive confusion and upset for her. I was trying to manage that and deal with that without scaring her more or upsetting her more. So I was trying to explain that I didn't think Dad was very well and that, you know, we're trying to do something to make him better, when I knew absolutely nothing was making him better. And things were just going, you know, spiraling worse and worse. My mental health was beginning to really suffer at that time. I went to the doctors and spoke to the doctors. They had really no clue about how I really felt, what was really happening for me. And I think I had 12 weeks or something, 8 weeks of some therapy that again was good. She was a lovely lady, but she concentrated on more of the domestic violence that had begun to happen, the mental abuse and the verbal abuse and the financial abuse. She didn't understand what it was like to live with someone who had no control over their gambling, had no control over anything to do with their lives at that point, and how difficult it was for me to try. I mean, I did things wrong. I'm not saying I was perfect for any point of time, but all I ever tried to do was hold the family together and keep the roof over our head, because to me that was the most important thing to do. And I had still not told a soul. Nobody knew. It was always putting on a front whenever my parents used to come and stay, whenever we used to go out, and very rarely did he come with us then. You know, if there was a family party or a neighbour's party, he wouldn't go with us because he'd rather be indoors, because I think he'd started the online gambling then. And you know, where's Bill? Where's Bill? Oh, he's working, or he's too tired. And then I started lying to people, and I wasn't a liar. And that hurt me. To lie to my parents killed me. You know, and even when they come to stay, they started seeing a difference in his personality and in the way he spoke to me in front of them. And they were like, what's going on? You know, what's going on, Julie? And I was like, oh, it's nothing. He's just overworked. He's really tired. He doesn't mean it. But he did mean it. He really meant it. And it showed how bad it was getting, because he wasn't hiding it in front of people like that then. And he used to talk about his gambling on a Saturday when the football was on. And I was always a football fan with my dad. You know, we all used to sit and watch the football together, but he'd be on his laptop and they couldn't see what he was doing. But I knew he was just betting as the thing, you know, the games went on, various different bets, various different sites. And it got so bad at that point that he'd go on one site and he'd get cut off. He'd just jump on another site and use that for a period of time and then get cut off and then jump on another site. So it never prevented him, you know, this, if you've gambled for over 4 hours or 6 hours, or it never stopped him gambling, because he just bounced from one to another to another. And that carried on for a number of years until a point that unfortunately the abuse became physical. And I was being threatened. One night, it was actually bonfire night, because I'd taken the kids out trick-or-treating, and we'd come back and there must have been an air of unease or something, because my daughter asked to sleep with me. So my son had gone to bed. He was still younger. He was fast asleep. She asked if she could sleep with me. So I said, yeah, no problem. And we were both in bed, and I didn't know, but one of the card machines had swallowed his card, and we had a joint bank account at that time. And he came upstairs, turned the light on, didn't bother him that she was in the bed, and demanded my bank card. And I wouldn't give it to him, because for all the best reasons, I was trying to prevent anything else happening. You know, my wages went in there, the mortgage came out of there, and I wouldn't give it to him. And in front of her, he dragged me out of bed, threatened me, and demanded the card. And with that going on, I didn't realise it was probably about 10:30 at night. and she'd run out the house to our neighbour. And in the meantime, he'd taken the card, he took my car key and he went, so I couldn't go anywhere. He'd gone off and my neighbour had called the police, which was, I suppose in the circumstances, was the right thing to do. But I was devastated. The police came. Everything was said, told. My parents came, I had to ring them. So this was the first time that they knew anything about the past 5-6 years. They were probably in their 60s then, and they took the kids. And the worst part of the kids having to go with them is my daughter had just started the first year of senior school. So she was sort of 11, 12. They lived like 30 miles away from me at the time. And due to the circumstances and the way it was handled, we ended up living with them for 3 weeks, because I stayed with a friend for 2 nights locally, but the police bailed him to our home. So we couldn't go home. They did put me in touch with a domestic violence organisation, and I just don't know what I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't want these people involved in our lives. I didn't want this to be a public thing. I didn't want this to be on him. You know, as much as at that point, none of that was my fault. I didn't want him to be arrested. But unfortunately, he'd been out that night. He'd come back. The home was empty. And he sent me multiple very violent answer machine messages on my phone. Many, many threats. Really not very nice threats. And the police took my phone. So they heard all of those threats. But then again, bailed him back to our family home. So the children didn't go to school for 3 weeks. More importantly, I mean, my son thought it was a great holiday with his pet grandparents, but my daughter, when we did finally get him removed from the family home and we came back with an order that he couldn't come to the home or come near us, she'd missed 3 weeks of the first stages of senior school, and it's affected the rest of her life because everybody had built their peer groups. Everybody had made their best friends. Everybody had, settled in. And she'd only probably had a week, I think. And she walked back and it was like being a stranger. And with her anxiety and everything that had built up over everything that had happened at home, she then walked in as a stranger to school. She had nobody, obviously the school knew, but she had nobody to support her or help her, as a kid through that. It's only really been in later life that I realised the devastating effect that his gambling brought onto not just myself, but to our children, that have been lasting. So from that point, we ended up separating for 6 months. I never stopped the kids from seeing him if they wanted to, but he had to see them with a friend of mine. They couldn't be left alone with him. And that did happen. And during that time, and continued after that, I never ever said a bad word to the kids about him. I tried to keep my personal feelings and everything away from them, which was really hard. I still hid stuff from my mum and dad, although they knew more. I still hid stuff. But he did try and contact me numerous times over that 6 months. And after probably about 4 months of that, I started to crumble. I started to think, Can we put this family back together? Can things be okay? What will other people think? Do I care what other people think? But I did care. I cared about everything. And at around the 6 months' time, when I had spoken to him on a few occasions, and he had promised me that he wouldn't gamble again, everything was going to be fine. He'd work hard, he'd found a job. He looked awful, he'd lost so much weight. I decided that I wanted to put the family back together again. That was massively to the detriment of my relationship with my parents and with quite a few people around me. But it's so easy for other people to judge and say, don't be with him, leave him, leave him, do this, do that. But one, financially, we had so much debt and I was trying to save the home. And two, I didn't want to just leave him. I'd met and married him. I wanted it to work. I wanted it to be all right. So I had to go and have a big conversation with my parents, a very forceful conversation, which I'd never done before. That was really difficult for me. And he came back to the family home. He was charged during that 6 months apart with harassment at the time. And he, through that period of time, didn't get any help because I made it very clear to the police and to the domestic violence organisation that he had a gambling addiction. I've made it very clear that everything about him had changed due to this gambling addiction. The reason he'd become so angry, the reason he'd become violent was because of his gambling addiction. But at no point, not once, did they get him any support with that. He went on a 6-week anger management course, which really was just a box tick, ticking a box exercise. It didn't help him. And so he came home. There were a couple of years of, I really believe, no gambling went on. And it took a lot out of me to get the family back together. Took me a lot of time going to my parents with the kids separately because they didn't want to see him. He had a lot of animosity against them as well. He blamed them for me leaving him. He thought they were in control of my thoughts and feelings. But eventually, over a period of a couple of years, there was a time where everyone could get back together again. Things seemed to be relatively okay for a while. So the family got back together after this couple of years, and I did feel that there wasn't any gambling during that period. There were a couple of arguments over lottery tickets that I felt was gambling, £10 a week, but he didn't. And I had to let that go. We managed somehow to pay off the credit cards, the CCJs that were taken out against him. I worked hard and he worked hard. Obviously, we still had the mortgage, the normal mortgage, and the fact that he'd added money to the mortgage. We paid off the credit cards and we had the mortgage, but the mortgage was then too high that we couldn't afford everything. So as a decision between the both of us, we added 10 years to the mortgage. So it was supposed to finish when I was around 52 and he was around 56. But 10 years on, it would have been 62 and 66 because it was the only way we could afford to continue paying that because we'd already used up our 2 mortgage breaks you could have at that time. Life was okay. He always wanted to know where I was and what I was doing. I presume that was his guilt and the fact that he was always thinking that I maybe or wanted to leave. And then we're probably in about 2016, 17 then, just before COVID was creeping up on us slowly. And I begun to see traits in him that really worried me. Using the phone more, using the laptop more, becoming distant again, becoming more snappy again. And prior to all of this, I did suggest him getting some help. But he was adamant he was fine. He was adamant he didn't need it. His mental health and everything was in good order. And you can't force somebody to do something. You know, like I said, this is the most awful position for an affected other, whoever you are, because you have no control. And I wasn't looking. He used to blame me all the time for controlling him. He used to say to me, you just want to control me. And I always said, I don't want to control you. I want to help you. I want you to be better. I want to help us. But he just saw that as me wanting to be the boss and me wanting to have control. So it never once, as you said about it, many gamblers in recovery have a family member, partner, wife, whatever, husband, control their finances. I didn't ever have any control over our finances. And I saw this change in him again, and it petrified me.
How long?
But
How long was it good for?
I reckon it was good for 2 to 3 years. Now, I'm not saying, I've got no proof that he wasn't gambling. And like I said, the lottery tickets carried on. But then that amount started to go up from £10 to £50. Now, he was going out working, but then I had 2 jobs at that time because I was having to go out and work more. The kids were a bit older so that I didn't have to be around 24/7. So I was still working in the school. I was doing cleaning jobs. I had this massive frame in our front room that drove him mad. And I used to do wiring for kit cars. And I used to sit up at night and have to follow these patterns and do these wiring for kit cars. It wasn't great money, but it was more money. And it was money. So, I was doing 3 jobs at that point. He went back to doing his night work in London. And he did earn good money. And as I said, we cleared the debts. We couldn't clear the mortgage. We cleared the debts. We added to the mortgage. The kids were doing okay. They were jogging along at height. My daughter was coming to the end of senior school. My son had just started senior school. Her plan was to go to university. But I saw changes in him again that just frightened the life out of me. But I was too scared to question them. I didn't want to question them at that point. We'd been through so much that I didn't want to open that can of worms again. But I knew if it carried on at some point, I'd have to. And my daughter went off to uni, so she was living away at that point. She was 18. And that was a difficult time for her because due to the effect that the previous upset in the home had caused, her mental health wasn't great. But she wanted to go to a university away. But she had massive anxiety problems of being there. And that was really difficult for me to help settle her down and trying to give her the confidence and trying to tell her everything was going to be okay. I was coming up to being 50 then. And he said to me, why don't you stop work now? You've worked so hard to help me through this and the debts and everything. Why don't you stop working? Because our daughter had gone to uni and I was supporting her, and it gave me more time to go down and visit her if I had to and come back. And my son was about to go into his year before his GCSEs, and I could concentrate on helping him through them because, as I said, I worked in a school, so I was pretty good at helping him with some tutoring. And I thought to myself then, do you know what? I've worked so hard for so long. Why shouldn't I? The debts are paid off. We seem to be doing okay. I will. So I left my job in the school. I carried on doing what I was doing at home, looking after both the kids, supporting them in what they needed at the time. But I now know that the reason he wanted me to give up work was nothing to do with either one of the children. He didn't want me earning any money because he had already started gambling again. And if I had money, he thought I would have had a way out. So if I wasn't earning, I couldn't leave. And it got closer and closer to lockdown. And I addressed, again in a very, very heated argument, addressed the gambling issue. And he admitted it in my face, admitted it. Literally that close with a, what are you going to do about it? There was absolutely nothing I could do. That whole 18 months, 2 years leading up to COVID was just a nightmare. The arguments we did have were at points he'd quite happily show me that he might, and like I said, it's never been about money, but he would show me that he was like 70, 80, 90 grand up on his accounts. And I used to say to him, can you not just give me 15 or transfer 15 or 20 into the bank account? Carry on with the rest if you want to, but can you not just give us something? And he never gave me, the kids, us a penny. He'd just continue and continue. And then the industry used to give him more. So if he was like 90 odd grand up and he'd done it all, and he'd sit there for 12 hours and he'd done it all, they'd then give him 5 so that he could continue. And not only that, over that period, he's started taking loans out in my name that I didn't know about, using that money. He started borrowing money from people he knew in London, which wasn't the best people to be borrowing money out from. And we got into lockdown and my daughter had to come home and my son obviously was at home, but he's a big old fella. You know, myself and my husband weren't that tall. I don't know where he come from. I think he got swapped at the hospital, but he's 6'3" and he's quite a wide lad. We lived, the three of us practically lived upstairs for lockdown. I used to go out at 5 o'clock in the morning while the kids were still asleep. He'd be still sat on the settee with the laptop. I used to go and walk with our dog at the time. It started with 2 or 3 miles. I ended up walking 10 miles a day with the dog just to get out of the house early in the morning for some reason and come back by about 7, 7:30, 8 o'clock. Hopefully he'd be asleep by then and we'd have a bit of time, a bit of peace for a few hours. He started bringing his laptop to the table at meal times. I asked if he wouldn't do that because I didn't think it was healthy for us, but he refused. He used to take his laptop to the toilet. He couldn't even stop long enough to go for a pee. He was like living with an absolute monster. And all of this was down to the fact that he was gambling and then drinking and then smoking with money we didn't have again for 12, 14 hours a day. My whole life was a sham. I began lying again to family and friends. I was trying to think in my head how I was going to get out of it with the kids. It was just such an awful period of time being locked in a house with a person who had no control over their thoughts, their feelings, their anger. The violence begun again. But my son started to intervene a little bit. He started to locked me out the house like at 11 o'clock at night in my pyjamas because he was angry at something I'd done or said. So my son would creep down, let me back in again. I had to hide my car keys to make sure that if he did lock me out, I had somewhere I could sleep or sit in. It was just the worst time. And throughout all of this, he still continued to gamble and was able to continue to gamble. He'd opened up a separate bank account that I didn't know about. As I said, he'd taken out the loans in my name that he used. And then there was some point that my daughter could go back to uni. So it was just myself and my son in the house. And I can remember the day my son, he was in his bedroom and I was in the bedroom, and some form of argument had happened. I don't really remember what about now. And he called me some really terrible names, really awful names. He'd always continually been accusing me of having an affair or affairs. I couldn't talk to a person, a male, without being accused of having an affair. I was what was wrong with the marriage. I was the one that had done everything wrong. I was, it was all me. And I was so low, I was beginning to believe that. I genuinely thought that I was the root cause of everything, which was such a hard thing to live through when you're already living through everything that we were. And the argument started and he was calling me all these names. And Tom walked in the bedroom and he'd never done that before. And he sat on the bed next to me. And he said to Tom, your mother's, I don't know whether I'm allowed to use some of these words, but your mother's a whore, don't you? And I can remember Tom standing up, and he was a tall boy then. And he stood right over his dad. And he said, and he's a gentle giant. And he said to him, don't you ever call my mother that again. And he said, I hate you. I hate what you've done to us. And he left the room. And I got complete blame for that. You've turned him against me. You've this, you've that. And he went off downstairs again to continue gambling. I think I just sobbed the rest of that night. I wasn't sleeping very well. And it was only a few days later that in a fit of anger, he violently attacked me again in the bedroom, held me by my throat against the wall. He'd pulled the blinds off the windows. The bedroom was trashed. He was quite drunk at the time. He'd been gambling all night. This was probably about 5 o'clock in the morning. I called the police myself. And I said to them, I'm fine. My son's fine. He's collapsed. But I just want you to know this has happened, so that if he wakes up and anything else happens and I ring you, you'll come quickly. Now, even at that point, through everything I'd been through, I wouldn't say, come now, come and get him now. I wouldn't. They turned up 20 minutes later and they took him away. And I remember that myself and my son were sitting in our front room. Our kitchen was at the front of the house, so our lounge was in the back. And all he said as they took him away was, can I say goodbye to the dog? And they said no. And he was taken away and he was put on remand, which was an awful thought. My daughter was at uni, and because she wasn't present at the time, he could contact her. So he was ringing her from prison, crying, begging, please talk to your mother, please this, please that. He broke her. He broke her. And because COVID was still about, he was probably on remand for about 3 months. And at that point, it was probably the safest 3 months I'd had in my life for a long time, because I genuinely thought at that point that somehow, some way it was going to kill me. I got my son through his GCSEs. But during COVID, I'd made a decision that I would open a bank account of my own. And I got myself a job, and it was the worst job I could have got myself at that point because of my mental health situation, but it was the only job I could get. And I started working 12-hour shifts in a dementia care home. So I was going to work and getting beaten up. I was coming home, taking abuse, going back to work, doing 12-hour shifts, coming back, taking abuse. But I had to do it because I needed the money. I also took on 2 private clients, elderly clients, and I'd started doing, quite ironically, some part-time work in the gambling harm sector with a lovely charity I worked for a couple of years. But this was all working 80 hours a week to try and keep, again, the home for the kids. That's all I wanted to do. Found out about the debts in my name, got some threatening letters from people he'd borrowed money from. He continued to hound my daughter. He was allowed out of prison, off remand because of COVID and the fact that the court case wouldn't be happening for months and months and months, which was a concern to me because, you know, we knew at that point, myself and my son, that we were going to have to go to court. We were going to have to face it. But it kept being delayed and delayed and delayed. So the pressure on us for that was awful. My daughter had a breakdown, which was awful to see. I think I was just living on my nerves. I was functioning, but I wasn't living. I just continued working. And it came up to probably the October of 2021. And he'd been going down. She wasn't living in halls anymore. In fact, she'd just come to the end of uni. And she'd got herself a first job, and she decided to stay in the town that she'd been to university with because she loved it so much. In a way, I think that was probably a good thing for her to do. And she got a new job. She was starting that in a few weeks' time. And he kept turning up, house she shared with some friends at like 2:00 in the morning, or a Sunday, or just unannounced, trying to get through to me through her. And on my birthday that year, October the 28th is my birthday, I had my own bank account, but we still had a joint account. And I tried to close the joint account, but they wouldn't let me close it without his permission. But I couldn't or wouldn't contact him for his permission. So the joint account was still there and the mortgage was still coming out of it. But what I did was, just the day, like 12 hours before the mortgage was due to come out, I transferred the money over. So the mortgage got paid. I always was checking bank accounts like I was a lunatic. And for some reason, I checked my bank account on my birthday. And he hadn't lived at home, hadn't lived at our address since for nearly a year. And he'd been able to go into our local branch and have a card sent to a random address. We'd had this account for over 20 years, living at one address. And he'd been able to go in there and ask for a card, say he'd lost his card, and ask for a card to be sent to this random address in London or wherever he was staying. And he removed £250 out of my account. Now, I didn't know it was him at the time. I thought someone had taken it. I thought it was fraud. Well, it was fraud. But I rang whoever you needed to when there's something wrong with your account. And they said, no, it's not fraud. It's your card. You know, it's your husband's card. And I was absolutely gobsmacked that they'd allowed a card to be sent. You know, with me going in there trying to close the account. All right, I didn't tell them everything, but I told them enough to know that there was a situation. They'd allowed him to have a card. And on my birthday, he removed £250, which in a grand scheme of things is not a mass of money, but it was an awful, awful feeling to have. And then on a Sunday, he turned up at my daughter's, and we'd had conversations at the point that I said to her, listen, he really isn't well now. I know you love him, but he's not well, and you need to be on your guard. So she was checking the door before she was opening the door to people. And on this Sunday, she didn't check the door, she just randomly opened the door, and there he was. Now, he'd fraudulently taken out a loan and ridiculously bought a brand new Mercedes. How? I don't know. But he wanted her to go out with him in this car, begging her to go with him in this car, and she wouldn't go. And they ended up having an argument, and he threw some money in her face and he left, which was very distressing for her. She was supposed to be starting the new job on the Monday. Well, she did start the new job on the Monday. On the Wednesday of that week, I was coming home from another 12-hour shift because I'm still doing the 80 hours a week with the care home work, private work, the gambling harm sector work. And I got a call from my son saying, Dad's outside the house. He's banging on the door, he's shouting for you. Back away, I'll ring the police and I'll be there soon. And he had decided, I believe at that time, that I wasn't going to have the house. I wasn't going to have a happy life. He knew he couldn't have a happy life. And I pulled round, we lived in a cul-de-sac, and I pulled around the corner in my car. I couldn't get my son on the phone. I told him to keep off the phone, but the phone was engaged. And I pulled round the corner, and in his very last show of defiance, I suppose, he chose to take his own life in front of myself and my son and the family home, in front of our neighbours. I see that night now ridiculously like a Die Hard movie, because all I can remember, multiple police cars, multiple ambulances, multiple fire engines. I wasn't allowed in the home because I was outside when it happened. So my son, a neighbour went into my son. I was kept outside. So many people came out and from everywhere. I just sat there and felt like my world had ended. And I thought he'd done his biggest damage. I thought we'd got through the worst. All I wanted for him was to have a peaceful life. I knew I couldn't be with him. I knew I couldn't stay with him, but I didn't want him to come to any harm. But he chose a different path, a different way out. So that left us then, well, exceptionally traumatic for myself and my son. I then had to be driven down to where my daughter was the next day to break the news to her. I then had one more day where I had to deal with things like police and whatever, and I went straight back to work. Because if you didn't work in care homes, you didn't get paid, and I couldn't afford not to be paid. And this was all down to gambling. And it was exceptionally difficult to live with. But again, I just had to carry on. I had to just keep doing what I was doing, trying to support the kids, getting them help for the situation. Didn't get myself any, because I had to work. And obviously that then has left us with the knock-on effect of who we are today. I spent a lot of years on my own because I didn't have the strength to think about being with anybody. I had really bad depression. There were often times that I just wanted to go to sleep and not wake up. But I wouldn't, because I had 2 kids that depended on me. When I loved them, and I wouldn't have done to them what he did to us. And so, a while afterwards, maybe another 6 months or so, I ended up working then full-time in the gambling harm sector. Started really campaigning for help for gamblers in addiction, affected others, going to Parliament, writing to Prime Ministers. I had to fight banks. I was made to pay back the loans that were taken out in my name. Obviously, I still had a mortgage over my head. And I also had to fight to get his private pension as well. Because of the way he'd taken his life, they weren't going to pay out. And if they didn't pay out, I was going to lose the house. And I couldn't and would not lose that house. And it wasn't for me. All he ever used to say to me was, you just want this house, you just want this, you just want that. It wasn't. I just wanted it for the kids. And I did. It took me a year or over a year, but I did win. Kept working, kept paying the mortgage off as and when I could, chipping away at it, keeping our heads above float. They finally paid out. And the fact that it wasn't masses of money, it didn't set us up at all, but it meant I could clear the mortgage, which meant that house was safe for them. And 4 years on, here we are today. I've continued to campaign. I've continued to work in the gambling harm sector now. And as years go past, the thoughts and feelings don't go away, but they're not quite as raw as they used to be.
I've partnered with Incremental, a brand new recovery support app, and I'm now serving as a coach inside their platform. I'm in there supporting people in the hard moments, helping build accountability.
The best part is they've given me a special offer for my community. Use my code Daniel, DANIEL, when you sign up to the annual plan, and you'll get 3 months completely free, which basically means a 90-day free trial.
You shouldn't have to do this alone, and that's where Incremental comes in. Join through the details in the description below, and you'll get exclusive access to me, along with access to all the amazing recovery support tools that are there 24/7 for you to use.
I wish I was sat in that room with you, Julie, so I could just wrap my arms around you and give you the biggest hug ever.
Thank you.
Like the mama bear that you are, just what you endured to keep that to try and keep that family together, just to like protect the amount of hits you took for those kids. You are the definition of a mama bear. Just the treatment that you got was horrendous. You did not deserve any of that whatsoever. And my heart was bleeding just listening to you tell the story. I'm so sorry that you've gone through all of that.
I'm still here. And so are they. And I wouldn't say it's made me a better person. I think I've always been this person. I've learned a lot more. My life has been immensely educated in many good ways by what I've been through. It will always be affected by what I've been through. And that's why now I continue to do things like this. Because if people don't know, if people don't understand, I know my story of lived experience is tragic. It has gone in all the wrong ways, but people take their life because of gambling related harm every day of the week. And it's still not acknowledged. It was acknowledged because I had to go to the inquest, and I made it acknowledged at the inquest that his mental health and what brought on him taking his own life was due to his gambling. And it's important that people know that, because otherwise it just goes down as taking their own lives. And I think people need to understand the depth that a gambling addiction takes people to, and how hard it is then for those left behind, not just to pick up the pieces. As I said, it's never just been about the money. It's about the emotional effect and the long-term emotional effect it has. I mean, I peer support many affected others and gamblers in recovery with Bet No More now, with our peer aid program. And it's hard enough for fathers to trust daughters, mothers to trust sons, husbands and wives. You know, the trust is lost. The relationship is pulled apart. And it's hard enough in those circumstances, when the gambler does find recovery and works hard on their recovery, for whoever's been affected by them and around them to bring that trust back into life and find some peace that it will never happen again. Because obviously relapse can be part and parcel of somebody recovering from a gambling addiction, and that has to be understood. But it's about the awareness then for all of those affected by it. And it's not always family. Sometimes we build family of our own. Not all of us are lucky enough to have, you know, relative families around us. Sometimes it's, you know, just community groups or your friends or your colleagues at work. If someone discloses that they have a gambling problem to anybody, that is them then taking on that responsibility, because they then know that this person has an issue. And that responsibility, may it be emotional, financial, whatever it is such a hard thing to carry, because you do feel responsible. You do worry, you do care. And, you know, I know that in my situation, it was my husband and my kid's dad. But it wouldn't have mattered. It could have been my best friend. Now, obviously, it might not have affected my kids so much, but I would have still done everything I could to support and help them. You know, so it's just such a hard thing to rebuild a life. And I do see many, many happy endings. I do. But I also see many, many families split apart. And that's why it's so important. Yeah, so
that there is some parts of it that actually can't be rebuilt, and part of recovery for the addict, for myself, is accepting that and being able to live with that. Like I put my mum through hell for 22 years, but I've been in recovery now since 2021, and she tells me every day how proud she is of me. But I recently sat down with her and had like a deeper conversation than I've ever had with her. And she told me, when she lives back in England, in Liverpool, I'm in Australia, so we speak on the phone quite regularly. She said for a split second, every time she sees me call, she still has that feeling that I'm calling to tell her some bad news. And if she answers the phone and I start the phone call with, "Mum, where are you?" that means, she said, every time I've given her bad news, I've relapsed, or I've had debts that I couldn't pay, or I've done something bad, I've always started the phone call with that. And she said for a split second, she'll still get that feeling, even now, almost 5 years in. And that was hard to hear, that I still have that impact on her. But like, she'll still call me and tell me how proud she is of me and all the work that I'm doing now. But I have to accept that that's something that I've done to my mother. I can't stop that from happening. I can't change the way she feels or what she expects when she sees the phone calling, when she sees the phone ringing. But all I can do is continue on the path that I'm on. And possibly one day that does go away. But if it doesn't, I need to accept that and try and focus on the other parts where she is proud of me. And it is a split second of a day that she has that doubt. But for the other 23 hours and 59 minutes, she's incredibly proud of me, and I have to try and focus on those positives. So it is all in all a happy ending, but there is still asterisks or terms and conditions, if you like. And I know a lot of people aren't as fortunate as me and can get that far or can build that trust back to the level that I've got it to. But yeah, completely what you say. Like, that I'm very fortunate that my family, my relative family, have always supported me despite the trouble that I've caused. And again, I know everyone isn't as lucky as I am, but I even got to that point with my last relapse where I didn't want to be here anymore. And I'm just so fortunate that the thought that stopped me from ever acting on it was the thought of my 2 daughters. They were 4 months and 2 at the time. And I just thought of them growing up without a dad. And that was enough to make me realize, no, I need to get myself right now for them. I got told in rehab shortly before 6 months before that, you'll never be able to love anybody else until you learn to love yourself. And I was like, what is this hippie shit? I'm not here to love myself. I'm here so I can get myself better to be the dad that I want to be and be the husband that I want to be. But in that moment, 6 months later after rehab, when I relapsed, I realized I need to want this for me. If I can get better for myself, you spoke so much about how you wanted it for your husband, but he just didn't want it, and it never works. If somebody else wants it for you more than you do, it's never going to work. I realized in that moment, I have to not want to live this chaos anymore. And then that will get my head right. And then I can be that dad. I can be that husband. I can be that son. But I have to do this for me. That in that moment, the penny dropped there.
And that's the thing. I saw him as that dad. I saw him in the early stages of having our daughter and the very early stages of having our son. What a wonderful person he actually was and could be. And I saw how he held them when they were small and bathed them. And we'd never been around kids, either of us. It was brand new to us. I saw how he used to hang their baby clothes out on the line, but he'd sniff them and hang them out. And I still, to this day, will never be able to ask the question, so you did it to me, but why would you have done it to them? Why? But that shows the depth of addiction. It shows how it overtakes your mind, your brain, your whole soul, and how it can lead you to places that you don't come back from.
You said something a lot earlier that I completely related to, chasing that big win. Once I get that big win, everything will be okay. So that was my excuse. Like, I wasn't doing it to anybody. I wasn't doing it to my daughter. I wasn't doing it to my wife. I was doing it to get that big win. Once that big win comes, perfect. I can buy everybody's forgiveness. The 3, 4, 5 times that big win did come, I still wasn't able to stop, and I went right back. And again, in that moment, 6 months after rehab, I have to want to do this for me. And I'm powerless to it. I cannot control the gambling. The times I've had that big win, what I've been chasing for 22 years, that I've hit several times, doesn't make a difference. I always go back to it. It's not the money. It's the thrill of being in action that I was addicted to.
And I think that's what people just they still don't understand that. They don't, why they can understand it with like alcohol and drugs, but they don't have that same thought process for gambling. I will never be able to work that out. And that's what I'm trying to do within my own work that I do and people that I speak to like yourself, plus also the work that I do, with Bet No More. We need to show that it is up there. When doctors ask you, how much do you drink? How much do you smoke? Do you take any other? Ask them if they gamble. Ask them if they're affected by somebody who gambles, because it is relevant. And it's either me sitting there because someone I love does it, or someone sitting there who does it. And you might just be able to speak to them at the right time to prevent, like what happened to him, happen. You know, people have got to really start asking those questions. They've got to take it seriously. We also need to support those people around the gambler, because I have so much respect for someone like yourself and many, many other people I work with who have got many years of recovery and work exceptionally hard to do that, you know, do what you do, bring awareness, work in this sector. But in recovery, you do get praise. You do get, well done, it's been a year, it's been 6 months, it's been a week, it's been whatever. An affected other, whoever they are, and it can be anybody, does not get the same kind of pat on the back or certificate or anything to the fact that they've hung in there and they've stayed there through all of very similar traumas. I always say when I'm training, I put affected others and gamblers in recovery together on our peer aid, peer support training program, because I feel they learn a lot off of each other. And there's a lot more understanding of each other's place through the talking and the learning and everything. And they come out with a lot more respect for each other, because there's a lot of people who haven't had these deep conversations with their family member or their friend or whoever that they've been through their recovery with. They've never managed to sit down and have these really raw, honest conversations, either because they can't or because their loved one doesn't want to. So it's really important that you bring these two lots of people together so that they both have that mutual understanding of very similar gambling harms that we both go through that journey.
Like reliving this story now, having this conversation. I know why you're here. I know why you're doing this. You want to help others. I know why you do all the amazing work you do with Bet No More. It was such a painful period of your life. How do you keep yourself motivated to do this? It was so hurtful for you, yet you're able to talk about it every day of the week. How do you process it?
I have to choose my times and places, like to do something like this. I couldn't share my story every day, because as much as I say my life has moved on, I'm very lucky that the last 18 months I've moved home, which has been really important to me. I couldn't afford to move home, but to have started afresh in a different house without that trauma around it has meant a lot to me. I'm beginning, and it's funny that you said about loving yourself. I didn't love myself for years and years, but I'm just starting, and only just. And we're 4 years on, 4 or 5 years on nearly from that traumatic moment, but I'm only just starting to be Julie again and leaving that old Julie behind. I mean, I do and have been told that I suffer with PTSD because of that one moment, but obviously the years that I had beforehand. And it's very difficult because I don't, half the time I don't feel worthy. I shy away from criticism. I don't think I'm important in this world. And it's really hard because I know people are always telling me how amazing they think I am and how well I've done and what resilience I've got, but I don't see it in myself. I don't think I'm looking for that. I'm just looking for a simple happiness, a simple peace that I can live my life. Yes, with work, and do this supporting and do the training with Peer Aid and Bet No More, and work on an Affected Others program and continue bringing awareness, but also then step away from that and have my life at home, in a new home, with a new bonded family. My son has come with us. My daughter's not far away now. We live near the coast. We've got a lovely garden. And I can go and sit in that garden and feel safe, peace. I can hear the birds. We can 10-minute drive down to the sea and just sit and watch it, or go for a walk, and enjoy just those simple things, but take myself away for a while from what I do for a living, because it can very easily overwhelm you. I can become overwhelmed again with certain scenarios and things that happen. I mean, the whole sector has just been through a massive upheaval, which has been awful for every charity involved, every person who works within those charities. It was a really difficult time for everyone, but we had to carry on with supporting people, listening to their stories, helping them through, meeting them at where they are right now and helping them through that journey or those journeys that they're on. And I will continue to do so because, sadly, they never stop coming. And it horrifies me to think in this digital day and age that we're going to have a new wave, I believe, in the next 5 years or so. And that's got to be handled. That's got to be managed and supported. So, we have to be there for them. I have to be there for them. Because if we stop, it's not even worth thinking about the consequences. I don't want to see any more young men and women, taking their lives because of something that's become uncontrollable, whether it's crypto, whether it's trading, whether it's gambling online, which is now so accessible and started so much earlier, whether it's gaming. There's so many different things that affect people now with this addiction that comes under the same umbrella. And I don't want to see these people suffering. I don't want to see the people that love them suffering. And we need to just bring this awareness into the forefront.
Funny you said those things then. Crypto and trading, they were my go-to for the last 4 years of my addiction, from 2017 to 2021. And I do fully believe the same as you. It's only getting worse. We're ahead of the curve. It is due to it being legalized in America. That's now escalating over there. It's getting worse all over the world. The loving yourself, you said it's been 4 years and you're only just starting to work your way around that. I see everyone, I see me, I see you, I see everybody else as a work in progress, trying to get better, trying to recover. In recovery, it's all a work in progress. The finished article, the finished product is me lying on my deathbed. I am in no rush to get there. So a little bit of progress is good enough for me. It doesn't have to be mastered today. So please don't rush to loving yourself. It's a constant work in progress. But I am just going to try and put one little Lego block on that self-esteem that you're building up and that loving yourself. I didn't know the old Julie. I don't know the Julie that you're aiming to be, but the Julie sitting in front of me today, I love her. Just the selflessness, the courage that you've had to share the story today, the selflessness that you've got working tirelessly doing what you do, and just you remind me of my mum so much and how you do anything for those two kids. Just, I love the person that's sitting in front of me today. So I just want to say thank you.
No, it's been a pleasure and I've really enjoyed having the chat. And if I ever get to Australia, I promise I'll come and have a beer with you.
I think I'll get to England before you get to Australia.
Yeah,
so
I think so.
I'll come and have one with you instead. You can show me that new garden.
No problem.
Right, before I let you go, 2 questions for you. If you could go back to that old Julie that we just spoke about, what would you tell yourself? Pick a moment, and what would you tell you? What would you say to yourself?
I don't really know, to be honest. That's a hard one for me. I grew up, worked since I was 15. I had great parents. They're still with me. I'm very lucky. They're 83 now. But obviously I didn't know where my life was going to take me. I don't think I was stupid. I think I was loving, and that just got battered by the addiction that I lived with. And the old Julie before all of this enjoyed her life. It was simple, it was fun. It had no issues. And that's probably, I say I wouldn't change anything. Obviously, you know, by the conversation we've just had, there's many things I would have loved to have changed. But it came into my life for a reason. And I'm here talking to you about it now, 25 years on, for a reason. And the fact that I'm finding that peace and that simple happiness again is enough for me to say, if you do genuinely, if you are with someone who you believe may be affected by gambling, or you are affected by your own gambling, 1, you're not alone. 2, you don't have to be ashamed. And 3, there are so many people out there now, organisations, Bet No More, GamCare, whoever, that are there to support either one of you, all of you. So there is no reason to feel like you've got no one to turn to.
You just answered my next question. I was going to say if you can inspire one person to get help, but you've just jumped the gun on me.
Oh, do you know what? That's the thing. It's still, there's so much shame and stigma about it still. So much embarrassment. And there shouldn't be. Because like I said, people are supported with drug addictions, alcohol addictions. It's no different. And there is no reason to be ashamed. No reason at all. Whether you are the gambler or you're affected by someone's gambling, just reach out for that help because it's there.
Reach out, speak out. And I love your attitude. The phrase that comes to mind, the attitude of gratitude. Instead of thinking about what we could have had or what we should have or what we could have, be happy with what we've got. Be happy with where we are right now. Focus on the positives going on in life. I love it.
Yeah.
Julie, thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Lovely to meet you.
Guys, you're still here watching with us. If you haven't hit a like on this video, why not? You've been here for over an hour and a half with us. Get down below, press like, comment below as well. I'm going to be passing all the comments on to Julie and I try and respond to them all myself. So comment below. Let me and Julie know what you thought of this conversation today. Tell us how it's helped you. If you've got time for a little bit more of my voice as well, there's a video on the screen right now that YouTube's recommended for you. Give that a click and I'll see you over there.